He came in early, quiet. No name tag, no badge, no briefcase. Just a black man in a worn flannel shirt and khakis. Sitting in the reserved section of the Harlan County City Hall auditorium, waiting for a public hearing to begin, Officer Brett Calloway looked at him and saw exactly one thing. A problem. In 20-2 minutes, that decision would cost Calloway everything: his badge, his pension, his name. But right now, standing at the side entrance with his thumbs hooked in his belt, Brett Calloway felt nothing but certainty. 3 hours before those chairs filled with the people of Darlington, Tennessee, Marcus Webb sat at a small desk in a conference room on the 14th floor of the Department of Justice building in Nashville. The desk in front of him was buried under 3 separate stacks of files: civil rights complaints, use-of-force documentation, internal review reports, all of it stamped with the name of one county, Harlan County. His supervisor had knocked twice. "Sir, the van leaves for Darlington at 9:40-5. Marcus looked up. He was 40-9 years old, with close cropped gray at his temples and reading glasses he kept forgetting to wear. He was a senior civil rights investigator for the United States Department of Justice, Civil Rights Division. He had worked this job for 19 years. He had sat across from corrupt sheriffs and lying prosecutors and police chiefs who genuinely believed they were above federal law. He had seen it all. He looked down at the file on top of the stack. Harlan County Sheriff's Department. 14 formal complaints filed in the past 3 years. 14 citizens, 11 of them black, who had walked into that station or called that number or written that letter and said, "Something wrong happened to me." And 14 times the department had investigated itself. The outcome was the same every single time. The word on every single report in red ink was unfounded. Marcus closed the file and pulled a canvas jacket off the back of his chair. Faded brown, the kind of thing a man wears on a Saturday when he has no particular place to be. He had a very specific reason for that jacket. He had been doing this long enough to know that a man in a suit walked into a room and people changed. They stood up straighter. They chose their words more carefully. They performed their best version of themselves. He wanted to see the unedited version. He wanted to see what Harlan County looked like before anyone knew it was being watched. He left the files on the desk, grabbed his keys, and walked out. He did not call ahead. He did not notify the county. He did not send any communication to the Harlan County Sheriff's Department that the Department of Justice was arriving that afternoon. That was the whole point. The drive from Nashville to Darlington took 2 hours and 11 minutes on Interstate 40. Marcus drove himself in a gray to -1,000-13 Ford Escape with 212,000 miles on it and a cracked radio knob that had been cracked since the second Obama administration. He stopped once at a gas station outside Kharkiv for a large coffee and a bag of peanuts and ate them in the parking lot with the window down, watching the trucks pass on the highway. He arrived in Darlington at 1-17 in the afternoon. The City Hall building sat at the corner of Revere Street and Lincoln Avenue, a 2-story brick structure with white columns and an American flag that was fighting the wind above the entrance. There was a sandwich board on the sidewalk outside. Harlan County Public Safety Forum, Community Input Session, open to all residents. 3:00 today. Marcus had known about this meeting for 8 days. He had specifically requested that his department not announce his involvement until after the public session. He wanted to sit in that room and watch how the department carried itself in front of the community it served. He wanted to hear what residents said when they thought no federal official was present. He parked 2 blocks away, walked to the building, and went inside. The auditorium was on the ground floor, with paneled walls, 2 rows of folding chairs on risers at the front for county officials, and 8 rows of community seating behind a low divider at the very front, separated from the officials section by a narrow aisle, was a reserved row of seats marked with small white cards: panelists, guest speakers, special invitees. Marcus sat in the reserved row, 3rd seat from the left. He set his coffee on the floor beside him, opened a small notebook, and began writing. He had brought the notebook specifically to take notes during the session. He had been taking notes for 3 years about Harlan County. He figured he might as well start here. He did not introduce himself to anyone. He did not make eye contact with the staff moving between the rows setting up microphones. He just sat and wrote and waited. He had been there for 14 minutes when Officer Brett Calloway walked in. Calloway was 30-7 years old, 6-1, with a square jaw and a permanent expression that said he had made up his mind about you before you finished your sentence. He had been with the Harlan County Sheriff's Department for 11 years. In that time, he had received for commendations, been named Officer of the Quarter twice, and accumulated 9 formal complaints, none of which had progressed past internal review. His supervisor was Lieutenant Raymond Goss, a man who had worked with Calloway's father before Calloway's father retired, and who had once written in an evaluation that Calloway demonstrated exceptional instincts for identifying community threats. Calloway walked through the side entrance and scanned the auditorium the way he always scanned rooms. Grid pattern, left to right, front to back. He saw the rows of empty chairs beginning to fill with residents. He saw the staff setting up the audio equipment. He saw the county officials beginning to gather near the front. He saw the reserved section. And he saw Marcus Webb, sitting in it, wearing a canvas jacket and old khakis, writing in a notebook. Something in Calloway's jaw tightened. He walked across the auditorium floor, his boots loud on the hardwood, and stopped at the end of Marcus's row. He crossed his arms. "Excuse me, those seats are reserved." Marcus looked up. He did not look alarmed. He did not look defensive. He simply looked at Calloway, the way a man looks at something he has been expecting. "I know," Marcus said. "I have a reservation." Calloway's eyes moved to the small white card on the seat beside Marcus. The cards were turned face-minus down. The names were not visible. "This section is for panelists and special guests," Calloway said. "It is not for general seating. I am going to need you to move to the back." Marcus held Calloway's gaze. "I am a guest panelist. I have been assigned to this section." Calloway's expression did not change. His voice did not change. It dropped, if anything, lower and slower, the way some men speak to children, or to people they have already decided not to believe. "Sir, I am not going to tell you again. This section is reserved. You need to relocate." A woman in a beige cardigan setting up the microphone at the podium glanced over. Her name was Donna Phelps. She was the City Hall event coordinator, 50-3 years old. And she had worked in this building for 20-1 years. She recognized the situation immediately. Her hand moved to her clipboard. Marcus held up one hand in a gesture of patience, the kind of patience that comes from long practice. "My name is Marcus Webb," he said. "I am listed on the program. If you would like to check the panelist roster, I believe my name is on the card in front of this seat." Calloway looked at the card, looked back at Marcus. He did not flip it over. "I don't need to check anything," Calloway said. "I need you to stand up and move. Now, here is the thing you need to understand, because this is the part that matters. Every person who had filed a complaint against Brett Calloway in the past 11 years had described this same moment. The moment when he stopped using the word sir and started using the word I. The moment when the interaction stopped being a conversation and became a demonstration. Of who held the badge. Of who that badge was for. Of who in his mind belonged in a room like this and who was there by mistake. The people who had filed those 9 complaints were a 40-1- year. Minus old electrician named Donald Reeves, who had been pulled from his truck and searched on a public road with no probable cause. A 60- for -year minus. Old retired schoolteacher named Agnes Morrow, who had been told to get back in her vehicle and not move for 30-7 minutes while Calloway ran her plates 3 separate times. A 20-8- year minus old graduate student named Terrence O'Kafer, who had been told he did not look like he belonged at the address where he had lived for 2 years. 9 complaints, everyone stamped and founded, because Lieutenant Raymond Goss had reviewed each one, and Lieutenant Raymond Goss trusted Calloway's instincts. And Lieutenant Raymond Goss had worked with Calloway's father, and the system in Harlan County had been designed, whether intentionally or through decades of convenient habit, to close ranks. Marcus Webb knew all of this. He had read every one of those 9 complaints. He had read the transcripts. He had read the dismissal letters. He had read Lieutenant Goss's initials on the bottom of every single one. He set his pen down in the crease of his notebook and looked at Officer Calloway with an expression that was calm and patient and completely, entirely empty of fear. "I would prefer not to relocate," Marcus said. Calloway uncrossed his arms. "You don't have a choice." "I believe I do," Marcus said. "But I would like to resolve this without creating a disruption in advance of the public hearing. If you would simply verify my name on the panelist list." "I don't verify anything with people who are trespassing," Calloway said. "Trespassing," Marcus said, "in a public city hall building during a publicly announced event." Calloway stepped into the row. He was close now. Close enough that Marcus could see the exact spot where Calloway's jaw had gone tight. "Stand up," Calloway said, his voice very quiet now. The kind of quiet that is supposed to be threatening. "Stand up and move to the back, or I will remove you from this building." A second officer appeared at the side entrance. His name was Deputy Clay Pickett, 20-6 years old, 7 months into his assignment at the Harlan County Department. He saw Calloway standing over a seated black man and he moved toward them. Because that was what you did when Calloway was involved. You backed him up. You did not ask questions first. Marcus looked at both of them. He looked at the auditorium, which was now filling rapidly, at the residents of Darlington finding their seats, at the city officials gathering near the podium, at Donna Phelps standing 12 feet away with her clipboard pressed to her chest and her eyes wide. He closed his notebook. He stood up. He was not standing because he had decided Calloway was right. He was standing because 19 years of federal work had taught him that when a man with a badge tells you to stand, you stand. And then you let what happens next happen in front of as many witnesses as possible. "You are making a mistake," Marcus said quietly, one time. Calloway grabbed his arm. What happened next took 60-1 seconds and was recorded on 4 separate devices. Donna Phelps was closest. She raised her phone instinctively. An elderly man in the 3rd row of community seating had a tablet propped on his knee and his camera app had been running for several minutes, capturing what he thought was the room filling before the hearing. A teenage girl near the back entrance had been filming a friend walking in and caught the movement in the reserved section over her friend's shoulder. And the City Hall security camera mounted in the upper left corner of the auditorium captured a wide angle of the entire exchange in high definition. Calloway pulled Marcus by the arm into the aisle. Marcus did not struggle. He kept his feet under him and moved when pulled, offering no resistance and no compliance, simply existing in the grip. "You are being asked to leave this facility," Calloway said, loudly now, performing for the audience, his voice carrying the practiced calm of a man who has done this before. A murmur moved through the rows. People who had been settling into their seats turned around. City officials near the podium looked up. "I want everyone in this room to hear me clearly," Marcus said, his voice louder than Calloway expected, steady and carrying all the way to the back rows. "My name is Marcus Webb. I am a senior civil rights investigator with the United States Department of Justice. I was invited to speak at this forum. I am being physically removed from this seat by an officer of the Harlan County Sheriff's Department without cause." The room went quiet the way rooms go quiet when something real is happening. Not the polite quiet of people waiting for a program to begin. The total, absolute quiet of people who understand they are witnessing something that is not supposed to be happening. Calloway's grip loosened for exactly 1 second. Just one. Long enough to mean something. "You're lying," Calloway said. And that was the second mistake. The first was grabbing him. The second was saying that. Donna Phelps was already moving. She had pulled up the panelist registration on her tablet. She knew the name on that card, had known it since Monday when the confirmation email came from the DOJ office in Nashville. She crossed the floor in 12 steps. "Officer Calloway," she said. He looked at her. She turned the tablet around. The screen showed the official event registration. At the top, in the guest speaker section, printed in black text, Marcus D. Webb, Senior Civil Rights Investigator, United States Department of Justice, Civil Rights Division, Nashville Field Office. Beneath his name, the reason for his appearance. Keynote address, Federal Oversight Briefing. Harlan County Public Safety Forum. Calloway stared at the screen. The auditorium was silent. 30-7 people watching. For recording devices still running. The City Hall security camera blinking steadily in the corner. Calloway's hand was still on Marcus's arm. He did not let go. Not yet. Not immediately. And that 3 seconds of not letting go, of holding on while the evidence stood directly in front of him on a screen, those 3 seconds were the ones that would be replayed on the news that night, because they showed something that no amount of paperwork could argue away. They showed a man who had the information and chose to take a moment to decide whether it changed anything for him. Then he let go. Marcus straightened his jacket. He looked at Calloway with the same calm expression he had worn since the beginning. He said nothing. He walked back to his seat, picked up his notebook, and sat down. Stay with me, because what came next happened faster than Calloway could have prepared for. And in a way he never anticipated, because men like Calloway always imagine the worst that can happen is accountability they see coming. They never prepare for the kind that arrives from 6 directions at once. Donna Phelps was already on her phone. She was calling the county administrator. The message she left took 40-4 seconds and contained the phrase Department of Justice Investigator physically removed from reserved seating, and that was all the county administrator needed to hear. The teenager near the back entrance had stopped filming her friend. She was posting instead. The caption she typed was simple. Cop just grabbed and tried to remove the DOJ investigator from his seat at Harlan County City Hall. Her account had 412 followers. Within the hour, it did not matter how many followers she had. The elderly man with the tablet was a retired attorney named Gerald Oakes, 60-8 years old, who had practiced civil rights law in Tennessee for 30-1 years before retiring. He recognized what he had just watched. He stopped the recording and immediately called a former colleague at the ACLU regional office in Memphis. The 20-6-year-old who had walked in to back Calloway up was standing very still near the side entrance. He had watched the entire thing. He had watched Calloway grab the arm of a federal investigator and try to remove him from a chair in front of the people of Darlington. He was thinking, for the first time in his 7 months at the department, that he had walked into a situation that was going to matter for a long time. He pulled out his phone and texted his union rep, not to protect Calloway, to protect himself. And Marcus Webb sat in the reserved section, in the 3rd seat from the left, with his coffee on the floor beside him and his notebook open on his knee, and waited for the hearing to begin. The hearing began at 3-4 in the afternoon. Marcus was the second speaker. The first was the county administrator, a man named Douglas Farrell, who spent 7 minutes discussing departmental budget priorities and never made eye contact with the audience. Then Donna Phelps introduced the guest speakers, and when she said the name Marcus D. Webb and read his full title and affiliation, the room did not applaud immediately. It absorbed the information. Then it applauded. Marcus walked to the podium. He set his notebook down. He looked out at the rows of faces. He did not begin with statistics. He did not begin with legal citations. He began with a question. How many of you, he said, have had an interaction with local law enforcement that left you feeling like you did not matter? He let the silence hold for 3 full seconds. Then he said, you do not need to raise your hands. I already know the answer, because I spent 3 years reading the documentation of 14 people in this county who tried to tell someone what happened to them and were told. Every single time that nothing happened, the county officials in the front row were very still. Calloway was standing near the side entrance. His arms were crossed. His jaw was working. I am here today, Marcus said, because the Department of Justice does not accept the conclusion that a department can investigate its own misconduct 14 consecutive times, return the same result 14 consecutive times, and have that represent an honest accounting of what occurred. That is not oversight. That is a closed loop. And a closed loop is not a justice system. It is a protection system for the people running it. He spoke for 20-2 minutes. He did not raise his voice. He did not use the words corrupt or criminal or racist, because those words were conclusions, and conclusions required evidence, and evidence was what his department had been building for 3 years. And evidence was what the next portion of this process would produce. What he said was specific. He named the number of complaints. He named the dates. He described the pattern without describing the individuals. He told the people of Darlington, Tennessee, that what had happened to their neighbors was documented, that it was being reviewed at the federal level, and that the Harlan County Sheriff's Department would be receiving a formal Civil Rights Act compliance review beginning the following Monday. He paused. He looked at the county officials. "I also want to address what occurred this afternoon before this session began," he said. "I was physically removed from my assigned seating by an officer of this department after identifying myself and my affiliation in front of dozens of witnesses and multiple recording devices. That incident has been noted and will be included in our documentation. It is, in many ways, a more efficient illustration of the pattern we have been investigating than any of the written complaints I could read to you today." He picked up his notebook. "When a person in this county tells an officer who they are," he said, "and the officer decides to disbelieve them and use force anyway, that is not an accident. That is a choice. And choices have consequences." He left the podium. The auditorium was quiet for a moment. Then a woman in the fourth row began to applaud. Then another person. Then the room. Calloway left through the side door before the applause finished. The video posted by the teenager hit 50,000 shares by 7 in the evening. By 10, it had crossed 400,000. Local television stations in Nashville and Memphis picked it up that night. By morning, it was national. The footage was clear. Calloway's grip on Marcus's arm, the 3 seconds of holding on after seeing the screen. Marcus's voice carrying across the auditorium. "My name is Marcus Webb, United States Department of Justice." A reporter named Shanice Hollins at the Nashville Tribune had the story filed by 9-30 that night. Her piece ran the next morning under the headline, "Officer Removes DOJ Civil Rights Investigator from Seat at Police Accountability Forum." The second paragraph noted that Calloway had 9 prior complaints on record. The third paragraph noted that all 9 had been dismissed by the same supervising lieutenant. Lieutenant Raymond Goss did not return calls. The Harlan County Sheriff's Department released a statement at 11:40-7 that night. It read, "Officer Calloway acted in accordance with established procedure for ensuring the integrity of reserved events bases. The department is reviewing the incident and remains committed to professional community engagement." The word "remains" appeared to have been added last. It sat at the end of that sentence, the way a coin's. It's on a tilted surface. Nobody believed it. Comments on the video came in by the thousands. Many of them were from people sharing their own stories, their own interactions with Calloway, their own Harlan County moments that had never made it into any official record because those people had no video, because those people had no tablet, no teenager behind them, no Donna Phelps with a clipboard and the moral courage to walk across a room. 3 of those people called the number listed in Marcus's DOJ field office contact information, which had been included in an article about the hearing. They called within 20 for hours of the video going live. Marcus took all 3 calls personally. He listened for a long time. He asked very few questions. He wrote everything down. The formal review of the Harlan County Sheriff's Department began on Monday morning, exactly as Marcus had stated at the podium. 3 investigators from the DOJ Civil Rights Division arrived at the department at 8-15 in the morning. They had federal warrants. They had subpoenas. They had boxes. Lieutenant Raymond Goss arrived at work at 8-40-3 to find the investigators already inside the building. He stood in the doorway of his own office and looked at the woman reading the contents of his filing cabinet. She looked up. "Hello, Lieutenant," she said. "We will need you to stay available." Goss called his lawyer before he sat down. The data the investigators collected over the following 2 weeks was detailed and consistent, undamning in the specific way that documented patterns always are. Not because any single piece of it was extraordinary, but because together it formed a shape that was impossible to misread. Every complaint filed against Calloway, the timeline of each dismissal, Goss's initials on the bottom of each dismissal letter, the dates of Goss's performance evaluations of Calloway, which were uniformly positive, and which had been written in the weeks following each complaint dismissal. 3 months of documented racial disparity in traffic enforcement data, which the department had been required to collect and submit to the state and had submitted, and which no one at the state level had flagged. Because the flag required someone to look, the investigators looked. The numbers showed that black drivers in Harlan County were stopped at a rate 2.7 times higher than white drivers in comparable zones. Of those stops, 60-1% resulted in no citation, no arrest, and no documented reason for the stop beyond officer discretion. 60-1% of interactions that had no purpose except contact. Calloway's numbers were higher than the department average. Significantly, Brett Calloway was placed on administrative leave 14 days after the forum. He was informed of this by a letter delivered to his home address. He did not answer the door. The letter was left on the porch. He read it inside, standing in his kitchen, still in his uniform from the shift he had just finished. He called Lieutenant Goss. Goss did not answer. He called the union rep. The union rep answered and told him, "We are going to have a complicated conversation, Brett, and I need you to listen more than you talk." Calloway did not listen. He talked for 11 minutes about how he had done everything by the book, how the man had been sitting in a reserved area without proper identification visible, how he had followed standard procedure for an authorized occupancy of event spaces, how none of this was his fault. The union rep let him finish. Then the union rep said, "Brett, the man had his name on a printed registration list that was verified by the event coordinator, and there are videos of you grabbing a federal investigator after being told who he was. The book you think you are following does not describe that situation in any way that helps you." Calloway went silent. The union rep said, "I need you to understand that the question right now is not whether you keep your job. The question is whether the department's actions during the dismissal of your 9 prior complaints constitute a pattern of federal civil rights violations. That question involves Lieutenant Goss. It involves the sheriff. It involves years of documentation. You are the incident that opened the file. But you are not the only problem in the file." He said one more thing before hanging up. "I need you to understand that there is no version of this where you were right." Calloway sat at his kitchen table for a long time after that call, the uniform on his back, the badge on his chest. He sat there for 40 minutes and did not move. There is a moment in certain kinds of accountability that is different from anger or shock or legal consequence. It is the moment when a person runs out of reasons, when every explanation has been used and returned and found insufficient, when the story a man has been telling himself about the kind of officer he is, the instincts he has, the people he is protecting, the service he is performing, when that story meets the version of events that for cameras captured and 3 federal investigators documented and every person in that auditorium witnessed. Calloway sat at his table until that collision finished happening, and then he put his badge on the table in front of him and looked at it for a long time. Brett Calloway resigned from the Harlan County Sheriff's Department 30-1 days after the forum. He did not hold a press conference. He did not release a statement. His resignation letter, which was 2 paragraphs long, was later obtained through a public records request. The second paragraph read, "I have reflected on my conduct on the date of the forum and I accept that my actions did not reflect the standards this department should represent or the dignity every person who enters a public building deserves." It was the closest he came to saying what he meant. Lieutenant Raymond Goss did not resign. He was terminated. The termination letter cited his role in the systemic dismissal of complaints without adequate review, his failure to escalate documented patterns to proper oversight bodies, and his signature on false performance evaluations that served to insulate a problem officer from accountability. The letter was 3 pages long. His name appeared 19 times. The sheriff, a man named Harold Pruitt, who had held the office for 14 years and had been photographed at every Rotary Club dinner in the county and who had never, not once, asked anyone to look at the complaint data, resigned before he could be terminated, citing personal reasons. The Department of Justice reached a consent decree with Harlan County 6 months after the forum. The decree required independent oversight of all use minus for incidents. It required a civilian review board with actual authority. It required bias training that was not a 1-hour slideshow but a 16-week program developed in partnership with the University of Tennessee. It required public reporting of traffic stop data by race, every quarter, posted on the county website. And it required one more thing, at Marcus Webb's personal recommendation. Every formal complaint filed with the Harlan County Sheriff's Department from that point forward would be reviewed first by an independent third party, never by the department itself. The system that had stamped and found it 14 times without reading would no longer review its own record. The 3 people who had called Marcus's number after the video went viral filed civil rights claims. All 3 were represented by Gerald Oakes, the retired attorney with the tablet, who had called his former colleague at the ACLU the night of the forum and who had not intended to come out of retirement, but found that he could not, in good conscience, refer these calls to someone else. All 3 cases settled. The terms were confidential. What Gerald Oakes said publicly was that the total figure, across all 3 settlements, reflected not only what had happened to those individuals, but the years of being told that nothing had happened. Donald Reeves, the electrician who had been the first to file and the first to be dismissed, had kept every piece of paper from his complaint, every letter, every dismissal notice, every date. He had kept it in a folder in a filing cabinet for 3 years because he had believed, without any particular evidence for the belief, that someone would eventually need to see it. He was right. 6 weeks after the forum, Marcus Webb drove back to Darlington. He did not take the interstate this time. He took the state route 2 lanes, slower, through the small towns west of Cookeville. He stopped at the same gas station outside of town. Same coffee, same peanuts. He drove to Harlan County City Hall and parked in the same spot 2 blocks away. He walked to the building. He went inside. The auditorium was empty. Chairs stacked along the wall. The microphones stood folded and leaned in the corner. The white cards that had marked the reserved section were gone. Just rows of metal folding chairs on a wood floor. Afternoon light coming through the tall windows on the east side of the room. He walked to the 3rd seat from the left in the front row. The same seat he had sat in 6 weeks ago, and he sat down. He did not take out his notebook this time. He just sat for a while, then he stood up, walked to the door, paused. On the wall beside the exit, mounted at eye level on the brick, was a small brass plaque. The county had put it up 2 weeks earlier as part of the consent decree's public awareness requirements. The text was simple. Every person who enters this building has the right to be heard, the right to be treated with dignity, and the right to be told the truth about what this government is doing in their name. Below it, a phone number. Not to the sheriff, not to a supervisor, to the Independent Oversight Board. Marcus read it. He stood there for a moment with his hands in the pockets of his canvas jacket. Then he walked out into the afternoon. He got in his Ford Escape and drove back toward Nashville. Donald Reeves still lives in Darlington. He went back to work as an electrician. He coaches youth football on weekends at a park off Milburn Road. He has not been pulled over since the consent decree went into effect, though he still places his hands at 10 and 2 whenever he sees a patrol car. Because 19 years of conditioning does not dissolve in 6 months, and he knows that. What changed, he said in an interview a year after the forum, is not that I stopped being afraid. What changed is that now there is somewhere to send the fear. Now when something happens, I know it will not disappear into a filing cabinet. That is not everything, but it is not nothing. Gerald Oakes did not go back into retirement. He opened a small civil rights law clinic on the 2nd floor of a building on Revere Street, 3 blocks from City Hall. He has 2 associates and a paralegal and a waiting room that is usually full. Donna Phelps still works at City Hall. She still coordinates the public forums. She had the white panelist cards laminated after the forum, so they would be more visible. A small thing, a specific thing. The kind of change that comes from a person who looked at a situation and asked, what could I have done differently? And the auditorium on the corner of Revere Street and Lincoln Avenue, where a man sat in the 3rd seat from the left and waited for someone to decide what kind of county this was going to be. That room is still there. Still the same wood minus paneled walls and metal folding chairs and tall east minus facing windows. Every month it fills with the people of Darlington for the Public Safety Forum, which is now required by consent decree and attended by the Independent Oversight Board. Every month, someone gets up and speaks about what happened to them, about what they saw, about what they need from the people holding the badge. And someone takes notes. So let me ask you something, and I want you to sit with it for a second before you answer. If you had been in that auditorium that afternoon, watching a man get grabbed out of his chair in a public building, what would you have done? Would you have pulled out your phone? Would you have said something? Or would you have looked away, untold yourself it was not your business? Because Donna Phelps crossed that floor in 12 steps. Gerald Oaks pressed record. A teenager posted a video. And 3 people who had been told for years that their complaints did not matter called a number because they finally believed someone might pick up. That is not a story about one investigator or one bad officer. That is a story about what happens when a system runs out of room to hide. Because enough people decided to stop looking the other way. If this story reached something in you, share it, not for the numbers. For the next person who needs to hear that what happened to them was real, and that real things leave a record, and records matter. Like this video if you believe accountability is not optional. Subscribe so you do not miss the next story. And drop a comment below. What does justice look like in your community? Because the answer to that question is not what it is right now. The answer is what we decide to make it. This story is a work of dramatic fiction created to illustrate real documented patterns of racial discrimination in American law enforcement and public institutions. While the characters' names, locations, and specific events depicted are entirely fictional, the systemic issues represented, including the suppression of civil rights complaints, racial disparities in law enforcement stops, and the use of federal oversight to address departmental misconduct, reflect documented realities in the United States. The purpose of this story is educational and humanitarian. If you are someone you know has experienced discrimination or civil rights violations, resources are available through the United States Department of Justice Civil Rights Division and local legal aid organizations.